Today we're going to talk about factoring, which is just reverse multiplication. So let's do a multiplication problem to review. If I was going to multiply, I'd do x times x, which is x squared. X times 3 is 3x. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. And negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. And if I combine my like terms, I end up with x squared plus 1x minus 6. So I went from having these two linear binomials, and when I multiplied them, I ended up with a quadratic. This is actually a quadratic trinomial. Now, that was multiplying. Factoring is reversing that process. We start with our quadratic, x squared plus 1x minus 6, and we figure out what would we multiply to end up with that quadratic. Well, the only thing we could multiply to end up with x squared is x times x. We have a few more options when we're thinking about negative 6. To multiply to be negative 6, we could do negative 1 times 6, 1 times negative 6, negative 2 times 3, or 2 times negative 3. But they have to multiply to be negative 6, and they also have to add to be a positive 1. So let's see. Negative 1 plus 6 is 5. That doesn't work. 1 minus 6 is negative 5. That doesn't work. Negative 2 plus 3 is a positive 1. That's what we were looking for. Just to show that's the only thing that works. 2 minus 3 is a negative 1. That doesn't work. So the only thing that could multiply to be a negative 6 and add to be a positive 1 is if I have a negative 2 and a positive 3. So my factored form must be x minus 2 times x plus 3. Let's do some more problems. So this is called a guess and check method. Okay, which again is just figuring out what binomials we have to multiply to get the given trinomial. So our answer is always going to be in this form. So I'm going to draw my two parentheses because that's what my answer should look like. X squared plus 3x plus 2. Okay, well, again, x squared, the only way we can multiply to be x squared is if we have x times x. That's easy enough. Now we just have to think about our plus 2. The only things that multiply to be 2 is 1 times 2. Or you could do negative 1 times negative 2. But if I think about adding these, 1 plus 2 is a positive 3, negative 1 and negative 2 is a negative 3, and looking at my b value, I want it to be a positive 3. So it has to be this first option, a positive 1 and a positive 2. So one of my factors is x plus 1. My other factor is x plus 2. There's my answer. Please note that it doesn't matter what order they're in. The answer x plus 2 times x plus 1, this is the exact same thing. It doesn't matter what order your factors are in, because if we multiplied these, both of them would equal x squared plus 3x plus 2. Let's do a few more practice problems here. Let's skip to number 3. So we have x squared plus 7x plus 12. Here are my parentheses. The only thing that could multiply to be x squared is x times x. 12, I have more options here, so let me think about them all. I could do 1 times 12. See, 12 is even, so I could do 2 times 6. And I know 3 goes into 12, so 3 times 4. And I think that's all my options. So I have 3 different possibilities here, but I need to pick the one that adds to be 7, right? Those are the two things that need to happen. They need to multiply to be 12 and add to be 7. Well, 1 plus 12 is 13. That doesn't work. 2 plus 6 is 8. That doesn't work. 3 plus 4 is 7. Perfect. So one of these must be a plus 3. One of these must be plus 4. X plus 3 times x plus 4. Or again, you could have written x plus 4 times x plus 3. Those are the exact same answer. Okay, let's do one more where our values are positive, and then we'll look at one with some negative numbers. So x squared plus 9x plus 18. Well, here are my parentheses. Again, the only way to get x squared is x times x. 18, I could do 1 times 18, 2 times 9, or 3 times 6. So I have to figure out which one of those would multiply to be 18, but add to be 9. Well, 1 plus 18 is 19. That's too big. 2 plus 9 is 11. That's too big. 3 plus 6, there's my 9. So I must have a plus 3 and a plus 6. That's my factored form, x plus 3 times x plus 6. All right, let's find some with negatives, all right? Here we have x squared minus 1x minus 2. How does a negative change our process? Well, x times x is still the only thing that could give us x squared. Now negative 2, I've got two options here. I could do a negative 1 times 2, but I could also do a positive 1 times negative 2. Both of those multiply to be negative 2. We want to pick the option that adds to be a negative 1. Well, if I think about negative 1 plus 2, which you could also think about as 2 minus 1, that's a positive 1. That's not what we're looking for. But 1 minus 2, that's a negative 1. So that must be our pair of numbers. I need a positive 1 and a negative 2. That's my factored form, x plus 1 times x minus 2. And again, you could flip those around and that would be fine. All right, let's do number 12. X squared plus x minus 2. Okay, well, x times x, that's the only thing that can give me x squared. Negative 2, these are the same two options we had, negative 1 times 2 and 1 times negative 2. Well, we already know that 1 minus 2 is a negative 1, so it must be a negative 1 and a positive 2. That adds to be a positive 1. There is our factored form. Okay, let's do a couple more. Number 13, x squared minus 3x minus 10. Well, the only way to get x squared is if I have x times x. Negative 10, I have a couple different options here. I could do 1 times 10 or 2 times 5. Those are the only things that multiply to be 10. So now when I'm thinking about a negative 10, I've got 4 options. I could have a negative 1 and a positive 10, a positive 1 and a negative 10, a negative 2 and a positive 5, or a positive 2 and a negative 5. Okay? Okay. Well, which one of those is going to add to be 3? Well, 1 and 10, that's not going to work. So it's got to be either one of my 2 and 5. So if this is a negative number, I need the one where the negative is bigger. So it must be 2 minus 5, because there my negative is bigger. So that gives me my negative b value. So we have x plus 2 times x minus 5. There's our factored form. Now would be a good time to pause and try one on your own. Let's find a couple more to do. All right, let's do number 23, x squared minus 13x plus 30. So x times x, that's the only way to get x squared. A positive 30, I could do 1 times 30, I could do 2 times 15, 3 times 10, 4 doesn't go into it, 5 times 6, or 6 times 5. So I started repeating, so I must have found all my factors. All right, so those all multiply to be 30. Which one of them adds to be a negative 13? I want it to add to be a negative 13. I don't have any negatives in here. But if I make one of these numbers negative, all of a sudden it's multiplying to be a negative 30. But we know that a negative times a negative is positive, so we must be looking at a situation where both of these numbers have to be negative. All of these are going to multiply to be a negative 30. Which one of them would add to be a negative 13? Negative 1 minus 30, or plus the negative 30, is negative 31. That's not going to work. Negative 2 plus negative 15 is negative 17. That's not what we're looking for. Negative 3 plus negative 10, there's my negative 13. So it must be a minus 3 and a minus 10. Okay, so thinking about the properties of our positives and negatives, right? A positive times a positive is positive. A negative times a negative is positive. A negative times a positive is negative. Thinking about those properties can help us narrow down our options. Let's do one more like this. Let's do number 24. We have x squared minus 9x plus 20. Well, again, the only way to get x squared is if I have x times x. If I'm thinking about 20, okay, I see that I'm multiplying to be a positive, I'm adding to be a negative, so I need to have a negative times a negative. That's the only way that I can multiply to have a positive number and add to have a negative number. So I could do negative 1 and negative 20. I could do negative 2 and negative 10. Let's see. 3 doesn't go into it. I could do negative 4 times negative 5, or negative 5 times negative 4. So those are my options. Which one of those adds to be negative 9? Negative 1 and negative 20 is negative 21. That's too big. Negative 2 and negative 10 is negative 12. That's too big. Negative 4 and negative 5, that's negative 9. There's my factored form. Oops, I wrote it incorrectly. Negative 4 and negative 5. And just to reiterate how we know this is the correct answer, if we were to multiply it, we would end up with that trinomial. So just to show you, to check our answer, we could multiply this. X minus 4 times x minus 5. X times x, there's our x squared. X times negative 5 is negative 5x. Negative 4 times x is negative 4x. Negative 4 times 5 is positive 20, so we have our x squared. We have our positive 20. And negative 5 minus 4, there's our negative 9. So this multiplied to be our 20, and then added to be our negative 9. And that's factoring. It takes a little bit to get used to, but you want to keep in mind, right, what's multiplying to be that C value and adding to be your B value.